The rifle in Sarah's trembling hands felt like a stone of lead as she pressed her back hard against the rough, weathered planks of the barn wall, listening with bated breath to the heavy, deliberate footsteps circling just outside. Through the narrow cracks in the aged wood, she caught a fleeting glimpse of a shadow. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the slow, patient gait of a predator, knowing that prey has nowhere left to run. Behind her, pressed into the hay, her 3 younger siblings clung to her like frightened rabbits, their tiny bodies trembling in the cold silence. Tommy, barely 8, gripped his wooden horse so tightly his knuckles turned pale. The twins, Mary and Martha, both 6, hid their faces deep in Sarah's torn skirt, eyes wide with terror. A deep, rough voice called out from outside, thick with the weight of years spent calling across endless plains. "I know you're in there." The sound of footsteps paused and then continued. "Saw the smoke from your fire about 3 miles out." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. Stupid, so stupid, to light that fire. But Martha had been shivering fiercely, and the biting November cold cut through even their thin blankets like a knife. 4 days they'd been hiding in this abandoned barn, surviving on a half loaf of bread and a jar of jam they'd snatched before fleeing. The footsteps stopped altogether. Then the voice came closer, a little gruffer. "Your horses? Been in my stable 2 weeks. Figured someone might come looking." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. 2 weeks? That meant he knew. Somehow this stranger knew exactly when Papa had disappeared, exactly when their world had fallen apart into dust and despair. The barn door groaned on its hinges. A shaft of late afternoon sunlight spilled through the cracks, illuminating the figure stepping inside. Someone Sarah had only seen from afar before. Marcus Cain, owner of the sprawling Circle K ranch that shadowed their tiny homestead, stood framed in the doorway. His hat cast a shadow over his face, but she could see enough. Weathered hands rough from decades of toil. A coat more expensive than her family's yearly supplies, and eyes that seemed to swallow everything in an instant. He saw them immediately. 4 children huddled like wounded animals, trembling in the shadows. His gaze settled on Sarah, noting the hollow cheeks, the dark circles under her eyes. The way her grip on that rifle looked like it was the only thing keeping her family from falling into the abyss. "How long since you've eaten?" he asked softly, voice calm but heavy with unspoken questions. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. "Stay back," she warned, voice trembling. Cain held his hands up slowly, no threat in his stance. "Not here to hurt you, girl. Just asking." The silence stretched tight between them, like a rope ready to snap. Sarah could feel her own pounding heartbeat, hear Tommy's tiny shivering against her leg. Outside, the wind whistled through the gaps in the barn walls, a mournful song that sounded like distant grief. Cain's eyes flicked from her to the children behind her, and in that glance, something flickered. Recognition, memory, maybe even pain. "All 4 of you," he finally whispered, his voice so faint it almost vanished into the stale air of the barn. "Get in." Just those 2 words hung heavy, like a noose tightening around her mind. Sarah's thoughts spun wildly. Get in where? Her gaze flicked past Cain's towering silhouette to the open barn door, where a shadowy outline loomed. A wagon, dark and ominous, waiting like a beast in the night. He'd brought a wagon. Her heart hammered in her chest. "No," she murmured, but the word cracked and trembled, barely audible. Behind her, the children stirred, their small bodies racked with hope and dread, caught in a silent war. Cain took a cautious step forward, hands still raised, as if wary of the shadows that might leap out at any moment. "Your pa owes me money, girl. 3 months now. But that's not why I'm here." The rifle in Sarah's trembling hands wavered, her knuckles white with tension. 3 months. That was when her papa had started vanishing into the wilderness, coming back drunk and wild-eyed, rambling about strikes, claims, fortunes just over the horizon. 3 months since her mama had succumbed to fever, leaving their fragile world to crumble piece by piece. Cain's voice was soft, almost broken, as he continued. "Found him in Deadwood," he said, his tone like shattered glass. "The stakes got too high, and he bet the homestead away. Lost it all to a man named Briggs." Sarah's knees buckled, the ground seeming to tilt beneath her. The homestead, the only place they'd ever called home, gone. The place where Mama was buried beneath the old oak, where Tommy had taken his first uncertain steps, where the twins had been born amid winter's icy grip. "Briggs is coming," Cain said quietly. "Tomorrow, maybe the day after." His voice was steady but edged with menace. "He's not the patient sort." "Then why?" Sarah's voice cracked, desperation tipping her words. "Why are you here? Why help us?" Cain paused, his gaze distant, lost in some shadowed memory. Outside, the barn door creaked as the horses shifted restlessly, leather harnesses groaning in the cold wind. "Had a daughter once," he finally said, voice thick with sorrow. "About your age? Maybe a little younger." Had. Past tense. That single word sank deep into Sarah's chest, heavy with grief and regret, like a stone she couldn't lift. Tommy whimpered softly, and Mary reached out, her small hand trembling to touch Sarah's arm. "Sarah, I'm hungry," she whispered, so faint it was almost a breath. Cain's sharp ears caught it, his jaw tightening with unspoken pain. When he spoke again, his voice hardened, a steel edge cutting through the quiet. "There's food in the wagon. Blankets, a roof over your heads, a fire that won't betray you to every drifter and claimed jumper between here and Montana." Sarah looked down, truly seeing her siblings for the first time in days. Tommy's ribs pressing painfully against his shirt, the twins' faces pale and hollow, their eyes too big for their small faces. When was the last time any of them had tasted a proper meal? When had they last slept without one ear tuned for danger? Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with suspicion. "What do you want in return?" Cain's face remained impassive, but a flicker danced behind his eyes. Something that might have been surprise, respect, or even sorrow. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but Sarah caught it, and her stomach clenched tighter. "We'll figure that out," Cain murmured, voice low and steady. Outside, the wind gusted fiercely, rattling the barn's weathered planks. Through the gaps, Sarah saw storm clouds gathering on the horizon, dark, thick, pregnant with rain that would soak through their thin, tattered clothes and turn this fragile shelter into a cold, miserable prison. Behind Cain, his horses shifted softly, their quiet wickers filling the tense silence. And then, a scent drifted to her, a smell so real, so tempting, fresh bread, sizzling meat, and something else that made her empty stomach tighten with a sudden, desperate ache. Her hand trembled, and the rifle in her grip dipped an inch. Cain's eyes caught the movement, and he nodded once, a quiet signal that she'd made a choice. Now, it was do or die. "Time to choose, girl," he said softly, voice edged with quiet warning. "My wagon, or whatever's coming behind Briggs when he arrives." But Sarah never got to voice her decision. The thunder of hooves shattered the evening's calm like gunfire, fast, fierce, relentless, coming from the main road. Cain's head snapped toward the sound, hand instinctively dropping to the handle of his Colt. "Down!" he hissed sharply, motioning toward the children. "All of you, hide in that hay and stay quiet." Heart pounding, Sarah pulled Tommy and the twins deeper into the shadows, pressing them against the rough barn wall. Through a narrow crack, she saw them. 5 riders on blood horsebacks, their faces etched with hunger and hard resolve. The man leading the pack wore a wide black hat with a silver band, and his coat was fine wool. Clothes that whispered of money, but carried the weight of violence beneath. It had to be Briggs. Cain stepped outside, boots crunching on gravel, and Sarah pressed her eye to the crack, watching as her father's old friend faced down the approaching threat with nothing but calm steadiness and a gun at his side. "Evening, gentlemen," Cain said, voice steady, carrying that same quiet authority that had kept him alive all these years. "You're on my land." Briggs dismounted slowly, spurs jingling against the stones, his face twisted with a mixture of contempt and hunger. "Cain," he drawled, tasting the name like sour lemon on his tongue. "Word is, you might know something about some missing children." Sarah's breath caught. The children? Her blood ran cold. Briggs's eyes flicked to Cain, and Sarah saw the gun at his hip, the way his men spread out in a loose semicircle behind him. Silent, deadly. "Children." Cain's voice remained smooth, almost casual. What children would those be? Briggs stepped closer, and Sarah's gaze fixed on the pistol at his side, the way his men moved like shadows behind him. 4 of them belonged to a man named Henderson, a man who owed me quite a debt. Briggs's words dripped with menace. Now that debt's been transferred straight to his kin. Her stomach dropped. The realization hit her like a punch. These kids weren't just homeless. They were collateral. The weight of a fortune, and not just gold. Do you know what 4 healthy children are truly worth in the right markets? That silence that followed was thick enough to crush bone, pressing down like a shadow that could swallow the whole world. Sarah felt little Tommy trembling fiercely against her side, tiny hands clutching her dress as if it were a lifeline. Through the narrow crack in the weathered barn wall, she caught a glimpse of Cain's hand, resting casually near his gun, as if he'd just finished a friendly chat. But there were 5 of them, and only one of him standing firm against the darkening sky. Cain's voice broke the tense quiet, low and steady. "I know what they're worth to me," he said softly. Yet every word carried the weight of a man who knew exactly how much was at stake. Briggs, tense and desperate, suddenly drew his gun. It happened so swiftly that Sarah nearly missed the flash, steel whispering against leather, the metallic click of a hammer being cocked back. But Cain was quicker. Like a ghost in the fading light, his Colt appeared in his hand, perfectly steady, the barrel aimed unflinchingly at Briggs's chest. "You boys might want to reconsider," Cain murmured, his voice calm enough to fool a man into thinking he was just making idle threats. "I've got solid cover here, and you're sitting out in the open, exposed like a carcass in the sun. My foreman's probably got us all in his sights right now, watching us through a rifle scope. How many of you reckon you can take down before he decides to put you in the grave? Or worse?" Sarah held her breath, her senses sharpening to a razor's edge. Was there really a hidden eye behind those dark windows of the distant ranch house? Or was Cain bluffing with that same cold, unshakable nerve that had carried him into this barn? One of Briggs's men shifted nervously in his saddle, the sound like a twig snapping underfoot. Another cast a wary glance toward the shadowed house, its windows dark and silent, offering no clues. "This isn't over, Cain," Briggs muttered, but his voice trembled with uncertainty now. The standoff stretched out, taut and dangerous, like a wire stretched to the breaking point, waiting for the slightest slip. Sarah's heart hammered harder, feeling the terrible weight of her siblings' lives teetering on the edge of a razor. One wrong move, one careless misstep, and all of them could be silenced forever, or worse. Slowly, Briggs lowered his gun with a reluctant sigh, the tension crackling like dry brush. "We'll be back," he promised, voice edged with frustration as he holstered his weapon. "With more men, with legal papers. Those children are coming with us, one way or another." Cain's reply was quiet but firm, carrying the weight of a man who knew the danger was far from over. "We'll see." Briggs mounted his horse, his movements sharp and bitter with unspoken rage. As he spun his animal around, his eyes flicked toward the barn. Sarah swore she saw him stare right through the gap in the wall, as if he could see her hiding inside. Then, with a furious flick of his reins, he disappeared into the gathering darkness, leading his men back into the night's shadowy embrace. It wasn't a question. Cain's voice carried a weight, a quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. "Tomorrow night, maybe the night after, when more men arrive, just like I said. Probably with papers that'll make what I'm doing look downright legal." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Tommy stepped forward, his small face pale but eyes set with fierce resolve. "Mister, why are you helping us? You don't even know who we are." Cain knelt, bringing himself eye level with the boy, studying him intently. For a long moment, he seemed to weigh something unseen. Maybe regret, maybe understanding. Then he looked at Tommy's stubborn jaw, the way he shielded his sisters despite being the smallest among them. "I had a boy once," Cain finally said, voice softer now, almost lost in the quiet. "He was about your age. Name was Daniel." He paused, voice trembling just a little. "Lost him and his sister to scarlet fever 7 winters ago. Lost their mother the same week." The words drifted between them like smoke curling in a cold wind, heavy and lingering. Inside Sarah's chest, something shifted. An ache, a flicker of recognition, maybe trust, an understanding of a pain that matched her own. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. Cain nodded, then rose slowly, his gaze sweeping over each of them. "You remind me of them," he said softly. "The way you stand together, the way you look out for each other." His voice faltered briefly. "The way you're not afraid to fight when the time comes." Mary tugged at Sarah's skirt, her voice trembling. "Sarah, are we going to die?" The question hit her like a hammer to the chest, leaving her breathless. Sarah looked down at her sister's wide, trusting eyes filled with fear and hope intertwined, and felt the weight of her responsibility settle on her like a mountain. "No," she said, voice steady despite her pounding heart. "We're not going to die." Cain watched this exchange, a flicker crossing his face. Maybe surprise, maybe admiration. "She's right," he said quietly to Mary. "You're not going to die, not on my watch." Without a word, he moved to his wagon, starting to unload supplies, food, blankets, a small cook stove that could be set up inside the barn. The scent of bread and dried meat filled the air, making Sarah's stomach growl audibly. "When did you last eat?" Cain asked again, the same question he'd posed earlier. Sarah hesitated, then admitted softly, 3 days, maybe 4. We had some preserves, but... Cain nodded, already unpacking with purpose. Soon, a small fire crackled in a metal basin, carefully placed so the smoke would escape through cracks in the roof rather than drift out the door. He heated beans and bacon, sliced thick chunks of bread, filled a pot with fresh water from a barrel in his wagon. The children ate as if the food might vanish at any moment, eyes wary, hands trembling. Cain watched them, his face unreadable. Pain, memory, or both shadowed behind his gaze. Then, suddenly, he spoke. "My ranch," he said quietly. "It's got rooms nobody's touched in years." 4 children, each carrying more than just their small frames, something precious, something worth more than anyone realizes. Cain met her gaze with a quiet resolve. These kids. They're worth defending, worth risking everything for, worth hiding from the shadows that might come knocking at any moment. The fire flickered softly between them, casting wavering shadows that danced across the weathered barn walls. Outside, night had swallowed the land whole, an endless black sea pierced only by the distant cry of coyotes, the whispering wind threading through the tall grass, and the faint groan of old timber settling into the cold darkness. "He's coming back with the law," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. "Papers that say we belong to him." Cain stirred the embers with a rough stick, sparks spiraling upward like tiny stars lost in the smoky roof. "Papers can be challenged. Laws can be fought," he murmured, his eyes flicking toward his wagon where the faint outline of a rifle, snug in its leather scabbard, caught the firelight. Sometimes, a man's got to decide what's right, no matter what the law says. Those words hung heavy in the air, wrapping around them like a shroud of quiet defiance. Sarah looked at her siblings, Tommy already drifting into sleep against a mound of blankets, the twins curled close like pups in a den. And she made a choice that felt like stepping off a ledge into the unknown. "Your ranch," she said softly. "Those empty rooms. What would it take for us to stay in them?" Cain was silent so long that she wondered if he'd answer at all. When he finally did, his voice was a whisper, fragile but steady. "Just be children," he said. "Just be the children you're meant to be." They loaded the wagon under cover of darkness, moving by instinct, whispers their only guide. Cain knew they couldn't wait until dawn. Briggs might return sooner than anyone expected, and the children needed a hiding place that wouldn't betray them. Sarah clutched Tommy, who had fallen asleep despite the peril, his small body trusting her completely. The twins, holding hands, kept pace between her and Cain, eyes wide with fear, but no longer trembling like prey. For the first time in weeks, they looked like children again, not hunted animals cornered by the night. Cain's ranch house loomed from the prairie like a dream, carved from solid timber and stone, a fortress against the darkness. Warm yellow light spilled from its windows, promising safety and refuge. A lone dog barked once in the silent night, then fell silent at Cain's quiet command. "Mrs. Chen?" Cain called softly as they reached the porch. "We have guests." The door swung open to reveal a petite Chinese woman, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes gentle but sharp. She looked at the children and stepped aside without hesitation, ushering them into a kitchen thick with the aroma of bread, coffee, and promise. "The blue room," she said softly to Cain, her accent smooth yet firm. "And the green one next to it. I'll heat the water for baths." Sarah wanted to protest, impose on this stranger's kindness, burden her with her secrets. but Cain caught her eye, a faint shake of his head. Tonight, they were just children, craving nothing more than sleep and safety amid the chaos. Mrs. Chen gently guided them up the creaking staircase, leading to rooms filled with real beds and quilts that carried the scent of lavender, a rare comfort in this wild land. She helped the twins wash their dirt-smudged faces and tangled hair, her fingers braiding with a tenderness that seemed to reach deep into their battered souls. She tucked them into bed as if they were her own kin, their small bodies sinking into the softness, shadows flickering across the walls. Gee, ran children, fleeing from shadows, from fear, from everything they'd lost. Sarah lingered in the doorway, her eyes fixed on this simple act of kindness, a flicker of wonder igniting within her. When had someone last looked at them with such care? When had they been children, truly innocent, rather than survivors fighting to hold on? From the other room, Tommy's sleepy voice drifted, fragile as a whisper in the night. Are we home now? The question struck her like a punch to the gut, cold and sharp. Home. They'd lost it, every piece, every memory, every safe corner where they once belonged. Now, they were strangers in a strange land, leaning on the kindness of a man they'd only met hours before. But then, Cain appeared in the doorway, his steady gaze meeting hers. His voice was calm, unwavering. Yes, he said simply. You're home. Later, once the children's soft breathing had settled into the quiet of sleep, Sarah found herself on the front porch, her gaze fixed on the dark silhouette of the prairie horizon, where Briggs and his men had vanished into the night's shadows. She settled into the chair beside Cain, her voice barely more than a whisper. He'll come back, she said, her words hanging in the cool air. With more men, papers, orders. Cain nodded, silent for a long moment, the weight of the coming storm pressing down on him. In the stillness, she listened to the night sounds. A distant cattle low, the gentle rustle of prairie grass, the quiet heartbeat of the land itself. The sounds of life, of belonging, reminding her of what they'd lost. Why? She finally asked, her voice trembling with unspoken fear. Why would he risk everything for strangers like them? Cain's silence stretched on, thick with unspoken memories, until finally, he spoke with the quiet certainty of a man who'd known heartbreak and hardship. Because 7 years ago, he said, his voice rough with the weight of those lost years, he'd had everything a man could want. A wife who loved him fiercely, 2 children who thought he hung the moon, a future stretching out bright and clear as the endless prairie sky. But then, it all shattered. He couldn't save any of it. Couldn't save her, couldn't save the children, couldn't hold on to the life he'd built with his own hands. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, hot and heavy, threatening to spill. But Cain's voice hardened as he continued. Tonight, I could save something. Someone. 4 someones who reminded me of who I used to be, before grief made me forget. A distant coyote howled, its cry echoing across the night, answered softly by another. The morning star blazed fiercely overhead, casting a cold, unyielding glow across the vast prairie. A silent sentinel in the dawn. That steady flicker held a haunting truth. Some things never fade. Some battles are worth every ounce of grit, and every now and then, even the most lost souls can find their way back home.